Did the early Christian persecution really happen? If so, to what extent, and how severe was it? And could one argue that the later pagan persecution by Christians was worse? I'm Quill in History, and in this two-part series, we will cover the history of the early Christian persecution, together with the Christian persecution of pagans in late antiquity, as well as put both persecutions in the greater religious and political context of the Roman Empire in antiquity, and through that way gain a better understanding of the nature of the persecutions, as well as their extent. Stay tuned! In the 1st and 2nd century AD, Christianity spread from having started as a small sect in Palestine to eventually grow into a religious movement encompassing up to 2 to 3 million people by year 300, to even become the majority religion within the empire a century later. However, despite this remarkable growth, the empire's transition from paganism was by no means smooth. And up to the conversion of Emperor Constantine in 312 AD, Christians encountered firm and sometimes intense opposition from their pagan counterparts. It should be noted that up to the mid-3rd century, most persecution of Christians that were carried out were local and isolated. There were no laws passed against Christians, and to the extent that Christians were considered troublemakers, local Roman officials had the authority to deal with them as they saw fit. The first detailed account of early Christian persecution was carried out by Pliny the Younger, whom in a letter of correspondence to Emperor Trajan around year 110 AD asked what to do with Christians being brought before him. The suspects were charged with refusing to worship the traditional Roman gods, which in ancient Rome was seen as a matter of great importance. In pagan society, the goodwill of the gods were considered crucial to the survival of society, and if members of the society refused to revere them through participating in religious practices like cult sacrifice, the gods could get angry and remove their divine protection, which could lead to communal disaster. The way Pliny decided to prosecute the accused suspects was by bringing a cult statue, order the suspect to make an offering to the gods, and curse the name of Christ. If the suspects complied, they were acquitted of all charges, whereas if they refused, they were faced with execution. Later officials acted in similar ways, executing or harshly punishing Christians who refused to recant, due to ironically being guilty of a crime without a law. It needs to be stressed that this attitude by Pliny was by no means the norm for pagan officials, and while some Christians were locally persecuted in some places in the empire, many lived peacefully besides their pagan neighbors in others. However, as the Christian population increased, it eventually started to get the attention of the Roman emperors. The first emperor to issue an empire-wide legislation that had a profound effect on the early Christians was Decius in 249 AD. In the middle of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was facing a stream of continuous political upheaval, economical crisis, as well as many barbarian invasions that pushed the empire to the brink of collapse. Because of this, proper worship of the gods was called for more than ever. Shortly after assuming power, Decius made a universal decree requiring that all citizens perform a sacrifice to the gods and swear that they had always done so in front of an imperial official. While the decree was not necessarily directed against Christians, it had a profound effect on both Christians as well as on the religious state of the empire in general. Up to that point, religious worship in the empire had been a local affair, and by issuing the edict, an official type of religion was now pushed for the entire empire. As a result, the persecution of Christians were now becoming more common and centralized. A few years later, in 257 AD, Emperor Valerian made a new decree, which this time was directed specifically at Christians, ordering the executions of all Christian bishops in Rome, as well as stripping all Christian senators and equestrians of their property. later in year 303, the harshest and most intense persecution of Christians were issued by Emperor Diocletian, which lasted until Emperor Constantine declared the Edict of Milan in year 312. Diocletian's edict declared all Christian meetings to be illegal, Christian places of worship to be destroyed, as well as Christian scriptures to be confiscated, and all people within the empire being required to perform a sacrifice or face imprisonment, torture, or execution. One important thing to have in mind, which we will come back to in the second video, is that there is one thing to issuing a decree, while there is another to enforce it. No imperial police force existed to carry out the requirements of Diocletian's decree, which meant that the task fell on regional governors or on municipalities. This in turn meant that the enforcing of the decree varied between different parts of the empire, even though the persecution in the places where the decree was enforced could be very brutal. Some Christians managed to escape the enforcement by bribing the authorities, some apostatized, and others ardently refused to give up their faith, and suffered harsh punishments with the death toll likely being a couple thousands. However, in the end, Diocletian abdicated, and following the conversion by Emperor Constantine in year 312, the persecution of Christians ceased, with Christianity eventually becoming the majority religion within the empire. As we will see, were the Christian emperors of late antiquity no more hesitant to persecute their pagan subjects than the pagan emperors that had preceded them, which will be covered and compared in the next video. Today, I hope you learned something new about the early Christian persecution in Rome, as well as about ancient history in general. And don't forget that if you like this video, smash that subscribe button as well as the bell icon so you don't miss anything.